name of the Holy and Undivided Trinity, one God. Amen. Living with a 5-year-old is a masterclass in managing FOMO. Predictably, on Easter Sunday morning, Kyle and I were greeted with tears. Fiona was sad because Easter was over and she'd have to wait a whole nother year for it to happen again. Oh, friends, this is the moment all clergy parents dream of. Fiona, I said, I'm going to tell you something that's going to blow your mind. Did you know that Easter is actually 50 days long? And she said, no, Mommy, no, it's not. And we had a whole discussion, and you know when you're under fire with a 5-year-old and you just make something up. And I said, well, Easter is 50 days long for people who love Jesus a lot. And so now I'm pretty sure she's gone to every person in her class and said, do you love Jesus a lot? It also didn't work, because the Easter bunny doesn't come on every 50 days of Easter, so she was still sad. Anyway, it was not my finest moment as a parent, but you get the idea. Easter is 50 days long, and for everyone who is not 5 years old, even for them, I would say, this is very good news. And it is also not an accident that the math of the liturgical calendar works out this way. Lent is 40 days, while Easter season outdoes it at a whopping 50. But friends, here's my question. Does the way we observe these seasons match the math? We go all out for Lent. Personally, we may give things up, we may pray more, increase our church attendance, and as a church, we are never busier than we are during Lent. We add extra formation programs and special music and quiet days. And then Easter Sunday finally arrives with fanfare and flowers and an Easter bunny and a rousing chorus of Jesus Christ is risen today. And then, what do? Well, for the most part, we just go back to our daily lives. We're so glad to be done with Lent. We need a break from all that church. And Easter quickly becomes a forgotten memory. If aliens arrived on Earth today and watched us move from Lent into Eastertide, they would probably conclude that Lent is the center of our faith and Easter is an afterthought. It is no accident that Easter is longer than Lent. It is not a theological oversight that we feast for longer than we fast. The whole point of Easter, I dare say, is that death does not have the last word. That there is no dead place in our hearts or in our world that cannot be raised to new life. But do we live as though we really believe that? I don't know that we do. The cross can repulse and even traumatize us, but it's easy enough to understand conceptually, right? Jesus suffered horrific injustice? Okay. Yeah, that's tragic, but ultimately not that surprising. We don't have to look far to discover that our world is unjust and full of suffering. Jesus died? That's sad, but not a stretch to believe. Everyone dies. We know that death is real. Part of why the cross is so powerful is because it's so real, it's not abstract. It's about God meeting us at our worst in this reality that all of us will one day have to face. But the resurrection, that is another story. We don't have an immediate parallel in our lives that we can call on to make sense of it. Most of us have never seen someone stand up and walk out of a tomb. If you have, please let me know. I'd love to hear that story. Just try explaining Easter to a child. Have you tried, parents? Chances are you'll be met with, he did what? What? How? Why? No, Mommy, that doesn't make sense. And just look at the disciples. Jesus rises from the dead, and they are terrified. They are confused. And according to today's gospel, they are still sad. They don't get it right away. And neither do we. Believing in resurrection is a process. It's a 2 steps forward, 1 step back kind of deal. Resurrected life is so strange and so foreign and so counter to how we think the world should work that it takes us a while to recognize it, even when it's right under our nose. Which is is why it's a good thing that we have 50 days to live into the mystery that is Easter. If we still don't get it, that's okay. We're on day 14 out of 50. We still have lots of time. And really the whole point of this resurrection business is that it is never too late for us to change, to grow, to heal, to be reborn. And so we repeat the cycle every year. 40 days of Lent, 50 days of Easter. Because Jesus knows that our hearts are still hard in places, that it takes our eyes time to adjust to the brightness of the resurrection. I love the story of the disciples on the road to Emmaus because it is so beautifully honest and so true to our human nature. This story is resurrection for the rest of us. And there's a real element of comedy here. How could the disciples possibly not realize that it was Jesus walking with them the whole time? But ultimately, are we really so different? The disciples only recognize Jesus when he does something predictable and familiar. When he takes bread, blesses it, breaks it, they realize in a flash, oh, that's who this is. Wait, I know this. Breaking bread is very Jesus-y behavior. It makes sense. What the disciples are not so good at is recognizing Jesus when he does something unexpected, which of course, he does all the time. And that's where we tend to get hung up to. Because like the disciples, we have come to expect Jesus to show up when we break bread. As in fact, he promises to do. This is, as we've been discussing on Sunday mornings in formation, the whole point of sacraments. That's why churches are in business, because we trust and believe that every time we gather around this altar, every time we break bread, the risen Christ will come to meet us. It's not to say he can't meet us in other places, but the Eucharist is a trusted, I would say even guaranteed, meeting point. And we need that. The world is so unpredictable, we need those touch points. But the story can't end at this table. It can't end when the bread passes our lips. The disciples meet Jesus in the breaking of the bread, and then they find that he has suddenly vanished. And it's not that different for us when we receive the Eucharist. We watch as the bread is broken, we touch it, we eat it, and then, where'd it go? We can't see it anymore because it's inside us. At that point, it becomes up to us to search for the risen Christ in the world and in our lives. It is up to us to look back at our lives and ask ourselves when our hearts were burning, when Jesus was walking alongside us and we couldn't recognize him. The Eucharist is what allows us to realize that every second of every day is holy and filled with God's presence, not just the hour we spend in church on Sunday mornings. The Eucharist is what opens our eyes and sets our hearts on fire to see Jesus in all the unexpected ways he acts in our lives. The Eucharist is where we go when, like the disciples, we are sad or weighed down with grief or full of doubts. The Eucharist is where we go when we have trouble believing that Christ has the power to resurrect all the dead things in our own hearts. But the minute we try to confine the risen Christ to the host or the altar or the moment, that's when he conveniently disappears from view. Because he doesn't want us to remain here adoring him in the sacrament. He wants us to go out into the world and meet him there. When we receive the Eucharist, when we meet Jesus in the breaking of the bread, we become the presence of the risen Christ in the world. In these great 50 days of Easter, we are always called to let our burning hearts lead us out into the world and find Jesus there, to be Jesus there. It will not always be easy. We will need to return to this place, to this broken bread, where we know we can find him for strength and for inspiration. But the good news is Jesus is not playing hide and seek out of some malicious desire to hide from us. Jesus wants to be found. He wants to be found so that he can raise us to new life with him. Amen?